Okay, and good evening again. We're gonna have a discussion. I don't know if it should be about an hour or an hour and something, with 4 distinguished guests, which I'm not gonna introduce because you already know them, and they need basically no introduction actually. Today I attended the lecture of Craig Dykers. I hope that you did too, and in any case it was filmed, so it's gonna be on YouTube. Maybe he's not aware of that, but now he is. And he mentioned one thing, and the thing was that the question might be more important than answer, that concept might be a question which leads to more questions. So I think that would be really nice if actually I'm not going to be asking questions, but they are going to be asking questions. And so they just watched the movie. Some of them have seen it a couple of times, I guess, not for the first time. So I would like them to comment on if some question occurred to them during the filming, or if they not only comment it as a kind of like, oh, okay, I've seen this and this was interesting, but what kind of question they would ask like themselves, or they would like to know an answer from the others or from the audience, or just to share it about the movie. And I'm going to start with Craig.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Something came to my mind that I've been thinking about for a long time, maybe 20, 25 years, a question that I still haven't answered. The question has to do with sort of playing the devil's advocate, or as I like to say, the devil's avocado, for a moment. And that is, what if cities aren't really so great? What if they're just not the best thing? And that question came to my mind after I visited a place in West Africa, a city named Conakry, which is the capital of Guinea in West Africa. It has approximately 1.5 million people officially living there, and maybe 3 million or more unofficially. It has no electrical system at all, so all electricity is made by emergency generators at the embassies. And when you walk through the streets at night, it's like walking through ancient Rome or something. It's all candle lit. There's no sewer system. There's a tremendous amount of disease, poverty, and crime. And just prior to visiting that city, I had visited several villages in the central portions of Guinea. Those villages had good health care, they had positive health, they had economy. It wasn't based on money, it was based on goods. They had beautiful landscape, they had privacy, they had entertainment, they had sex, they had everything that you might want out of a city. But they moved in enormous numbers to this city, where they gave up a beautiful landscape, they gave up a sense of community, and they gave up their health, and they didn't improve their economic circumstances at all. So while it's a little unpopular to ask this, I just want to ask, why do people move to cities, and what if they're not the best thing that we can actually create? Even though I love cities and I've lived in them all my life.
Thank you. If somebody would like to answer, then it's a possibility. Alex.
Well, I think people have been moving to cities since ancient times, and I mean, I think that's part of human nature. I know Aristotle said that cities are places of living well, and villages are places just to live. So there's that fundamental sense that the city will give you something more than you have. And I know the World Bank does this, I think it's bi-yearly economic development report, and the one from a couple of years ago had a terrific comparison, which I had never thought of, but it actually used the idea of density and diversity in economics as mirroring density and diversity in city planning, and made the case that it is only through density and diversity that you do get substantial economic development, and that no society has ever actually developed economically without some form of urbanization. And even though the 4 million people who every 2 weeks come to one of these cities, they're making a bet. They're either chased by conditions that are oppressive to them where they are, or lured by hopes of things they don't have now, but they still come. And I suppose in the aggregate, they're making the right bet. That statistically, yes, the city will lead to a better life. I think in watching the film Urbanized, it only hints at it, but the massive numbers of people coming to cities that aren't really cities in the sense that we think of them. They're really fringes of disorganized and not particularly equitable places. And I just wonder, I have the privilege of working in what I feel is the greatest city in the world under an incredibly good mayor with fantastic fellow commissioners and in a wonderful era of community building and progress, and then just stepping back for a second and saying, well, how does that translate towards making an urban life better for the vast majority of new people who are coming to cities? So it's a very open question to me, but what is there that we've learned, and how does it translate in a way that will make anyone new to a city feel they've made the right choice?
David, do you want to pick one?
I would take a different, let's say, approach right now. I would say that the film, exactly a little bit on this line, the film wasn't linear. It was very non-linear, and it was jumping from the extremes of the third world to High Line, which is a totally different environment, a totally different kind of person. And then we went, I don't know, to the worst examples in the United States. Then we went to China, and then we wound up back in Brazil. And I think that in itself was telling that the problems in urbanization are very diverse, very different in every culture. It wasn't, maybe I was expecting by the title that we would come to some kind of conclusion, but there is no conclusion. And so that's why we have questions here, is that the result of the film was a very big question, and that each culture has its own different, very difficult urban problems. And conspicuous for me was that Europe was largely left out of this film. So, most of the architects here are working and living in Europe. So, it's as if the film was saying that Europe is the greatest urban space in the world, and so let's not talk about it, because there's not the poverty that were in some of the third world countries. The densities aren't the same. But for us, and for me, I'm here 18 years, and I'm working in Europe for 20 years, there are very big problems. So I'm a little bit disappointed that it kind of glossed over what could be, questions for us architects working in Europe, because we see a lot of problems. So maybe I changed the subject from being philosophical, but I'm direct about it. The film was very interesting to me, that it wasn't linear at all, and it's forced you to think about how everybody has different problems, and that they're very vast scale of problems. And that maybe that you could think and take some of the things from those diverse places and use that in your own problem solving as an architect or an urbanist.
Well, the film was not linear, but maybe you have spotted that every bad guy was fat in that movie. I think. Just take a look once you're gonna see it again, take closer look on that. So, Matúš.
I have some issue. I have some problem with that movie, because I'm not sure who should be audience of that movie, because if we are, I mean, architect who in a way dealing at least a little bit with urban life and urbanism or city life can see that the movie, I mean, you need more than 80 minutes to really kind of address some kind of problem. Was too deep, too vast. But I'm afraid that like a normal audience, not architecture audience, or somebody who is not immersed in the problematic, can see that the problems are not so difficult, and that they are quite easy to solve, because you saw some really kind of quick solution in the movie as well. But the real life is so different. I mean, the example of the Germany of the station, I think that the movie wasn't really reflecting the true situation of that project. And also the mayor, former mayor of Bogota. He is the guy who wasn't able to be re-elected from after 2001. So wasn't, I mean, that's, I have this small problem with the movie, and I have one question which it came to my mind during the the scoring of the movie. And what is the, I mean, this question is not very politically correct, but what is where is the line between the super democratic process of forming our cities and the moment where too many compromises bring bad solutions and bad ideas? I'm talking, if you imagine in Bratislava, I'm sure also in Prague, in everywhere, group of few people can stop some construction for 2 years, 3 years without any problem. It's very easy, and of course it's very important to be democratic in this process. But where's the line? I mean, it's a big, and there's also the story of New York. I think Commissioner of DOT Janet Sadikan was doing. You can correct me if I'm wrong. She was doing these pedestrian plazas and everything, helping. She was doing it with the pilots, no? So she kind of go and said this is temporary, and she left out all these, I mean, at least in the first stage, all these groups and community meetings and so on. So, I mean, that's also the sign that the pressure of trying to be more Robert Moses than some kind of other democratic super process is quite strong in the cities. I don't know.
Would Alex like to reply to Matúš's questions?
Well, first on the subject of Jeanette, she is a tremendous transportation commissioner who's used ingenuity and bravery to accomplish things that just years and years could not have been accomplished. But she did that entirely within the land use process in New York. She did that entirely with the powers that she had as transportation commissioner. But to sort of illustrate that, I probably have to tell you a little bit more about the land use process in New York, which does allow for both top-down and bottom-up, both for Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs. And that's why I think it's so effective today. What you saw in the movie was just a little snippet on both Robert Moses, who was, of course, the great power broker of New York, and I was telling the story to an earlier audience about how my former mentor used to work for the governor of New York when Moses was there, and he would walk into the room with this super powerful governor and just hand him a manila envelope with the names of projects written in pencil that he wanted funding, and he got funding, and that was the planning process, period. Now, he eventually met, as the movie said, Jane Jacobs when he tried to put an expressway through Greenwich Village and Soho, and she stopped him. That doesn't mean she won the war, let's say. Over the next decade or so, the pendulum swung both ways. But out of that struggle, there came to be the community board system in New York City, which gave every neighborhood a formal group of people that would be included in the planning process and could be in the neighborhood itself. It gave us something called the Uniform Land Use Review Process, ULURP, which is a law that mandates that a project, any major project or change in the zoning code, goes through 7 months of input, both from the top down as well as from the bottom up at regular intervals. And no project exits the ULURP process the way it came in. But it does exit at the end, and it's voted on by the city council, which is the ultimate representation of the democratic process in the city. And then it's signed into law by the mayor, and it becomes the law. And that balance of the Robert Moses top-down and the Jane Jacobs bottom-up took probably 15 or 18 years to figure out after their initial clash. And we're in a very fortunate period of time where now it is how things function. It's very complex. It takes a long time, but it does give each person their say, their chance for their input. And ultimately, this balance between top-down and bottom-up is I like to think of it as the fact that people in power will listen and that people in the community will wait their turn to give their input. That's the magic that turns process into respect. And I'll say it again and again, without that respect, you can't blend both top-down and bottom-up in something productive.
I'll make a comment. I wanted to challenge your statement. I think architects have a tendency to blame everyone else. Developers, politicians, people, our other architect friends. Everyone is messed up, except for us because we've got great design ideas. But my challenge is, and I've been thinking a lot about this, we have to set aside some of the traditional ways of thinking about architecture. In the public sphere, we have to find new processes to connect to those 10 people who are going to tear your project apart. And if we don't find ways to adequately communicate with them, and if we don't create those systems ourselves, if nobody else will, then we have to take responsibility for those 10 people ripping our project to shreds. So in our office, we spend a lot of time going out, we do a lot of talking before we draw anything. It doesn't mean that those 10 people are telling us what to draw. It just means that we're sort of connecting and creating a dialogue. And oftentimes the dialogue is what's the problem, not the fact that they don't like your work or they want to rip it to shreds, but that they just feel alienated. And alienation is one of the biggest challenges about a city. Everyone feels alienated. They feel they don't have any place. And when architects come along and push them even further away, they feel more alienated. So I think it's true that we shouldn't have kind of ridiculous, what I would say, democracy without knowledge. You know, we use the word democracy so easily. It means 50,000 things. You have ignorant democracy. You have careful democracy, you have representative democracy, so many types of democracy. But I think that for us, it's important to reach out and not only listen, but also talk and find new ways to talk to people. And that could get rid of some of these imbalances that occur.
Could I react to that? So, you know, we're talking about how nothing works and we're battling everyone. Is there anywhere, do we have a place that's an example, a paradigm of where the system works?
I think he just said New York.
Oh, no, well, New York. No, I don't think so. No, I'm not saying that it doesn't work. I'm saying, can we have another example besides New York?
There are some things, specific things in different cities that I've always found interesting. I know when Christiania in Copenhagen developed, that was really fascinating. You know, it was this kind of occupation of the city, and the city found a way to deal with it.
Well, I'm trying to give hope to these people here, these designers, that it's not just let's say, you know, catastrophic, that they're just going to run into these problems and there's no solution for them. And I don't even want to bring up corruption. You know, it's terrible. But there have to be examples in the world that they can look at, that we can give them, that the system can work, that it does work somewhere, even if it's a smaller city.
I think the question is maybe too broad. I don't think you'll ever find a perfect city, but you'll find pieces of cities that are really great.
I was referring to the interaction with people that he was referring to, that it's very difficult. And what's the limit of the interaction of people? Can we say there should be a limit? I don't know. But the point for me was, do we have an example? You know, I don't want to use New York, but could we use a European or another part of the world example where the system works, people interact, architects appreciate that, there's some balance in it, and a successful city is evolved from that?
Maybe London.
One movement that I'm seeing more and more of is the pop-up movement, and where people simply make they'll make the change they want, but they'll make it out of temporary materials, and that as a nascent movement, I think has really great hope in many situations and in many classes of city around the world, rich cities, poor cities. The idea of trying something out on the basis of it being temporary, letting people experience it. If they like it, great. If they don't, well, the consequences will be quickly clear. But as the speed of the world continues to increase, the traditional master planning process, the traditional way of going about the planning and expansion of cities is not really keeping up. And I would say a great unanswered question is, how can we speed up that process of experimenting, identifying what the problem is, developing a solution to the problem that's an experiment, and then if the experiment works, multiplying that solution.
Craig, in today's lecture you said that the concept is a question that leads to more questions, I guess. So you started with your question of what if cities are not that great? Could you continue?
Well, every time I ask that question, I usually get, and I ask it a lot, the same kind of backlash, which is, no, actually, cities are great, this is why they're great, here's what makes them great, and gee, they're great. So, and they are, I mean, cities are pretty impressive. I really, you know, I've lived in one all my life. Most of us are born inside of a building, and we die very near a building or in a city, so we live, most of us, our lives in cities. But I still like to think, the question, I would love to get an answer that really does say, well, actually, no, cities aren't so great. There's this alternative, or there's this alternative way of seeing a city. And that has been tried in the past unsuccessfully through some of the great master architects and planners who tried to rethink cities, and they basically just messed it up. But
what does that word "great" mean? I mean, are we just saying our city? Is the question you're asking? Our city's great? I don't know if that means, but I think we can quantifiably ask: our city's attractive? Yeah. You know, value neutral about whether they're great or bad, but are they attracting people?
Well, I like what Rem Koolhaas said, that the cities aren't designed, and they have bad qualities and bad environments. And my opinion is, people are not leaving good cities. They're not going away from good environments. They're leaving bad cities and bad environments. And so those are the places we have to try to change. Yeah.
But some people are going to bad cities too, and many big cities in the world that are not functioning.
Yeah, for existential reasons, maybe. For existential reasons, maybe they need work, or
yeah, but they can get work elsewhere. I don't believe there. You cannot go. My feeling is anyway that if you go to a well-operating, small-scale village in some of the locations where some of our worst world cities are, they have work, they have entertainment. They have an economy. It's just all different economies. It's different kind of work. It's all different than what we define in cities as valuable. They have all of that. They even have privacy. That's the thing that often people say, well, you can be private in a city. You can lock yourself in a room and nobody cares, and you don't have your mother or father or your great uncle or your great great uncle staring at you, you know, doing strange things. You know, but you actually do get that in small towns and small villages. They're just in different forms. So I think that for me it would be interesting to suggest that cities operate. I think it's like everything else that we do. We have to be honest about it. Cities have really negative traits, just like we as people have good traits and we have bad traits. And I just think that it's useful in these kinds of discussions to talk about those negative traits more often. As I mentioned today, a city is a kind of a form of media. It tries to sell itself. It tries to control people. It's like our mother. Our mother gives us life. We love her, but she controls us to death as children. So you love your mother, you hate your mother. It's the same with cities. Yeah, my mom's not here.
Well, defining city is actually quite hard to do. I mean, in the same breath, we're talking about things as different as Lagos and Cleveland. You know, cities from cities, sort of as complex as they are, they sort of divide into three categories. You know, the megalopolis of the 10 million plus people, the metropolis of 1 million plus people, and then this whole category of just plain old city below that. But there's no commonly accepted standard for what a city is. I think in Iceland you need 200 people living together. You know, in China you need to have 100,000. Well, but I think in answer to some of Craig's question is, what is that threshold for a city? And what you're describing sounds like something more than a village.
For me, a city is a very simple definition. It's simply a place that has a legal restriction to its limit and has legislated values that control it. That's it. I don't care about the number of people. I just care that it's legislated and it has a governmentally mandated system. That's what, to me, and in fact the root of the word city, I think in many languages, like in Chinese, it's just a place with a wall around it.
But it could be a town or a village also.
It could be, yeah, as long as that is legislated in a very clear structure.
City, not necessarily, but organized agglomeration of people.
Yeah, that's correct. Maybe it's a good way. I'm sorry, I probably, yeah, it didn't cross my mind until you said that.
No, I'm used to translating.
I think all of you are aware of this Mercer ranking, which became really popular in recent years, which kind of evaluates city from different categories, from, I guess, almost like 80 categories. And recently it was several times won by Vienna. Before that it was won by several Swiss cities and whatever. But if you take a look on the first, let's say, 30 on the list, actually what occurs is that the Vienna is the biggest. It's like 1.6, 1.8 million people. And then the next is kind of like Zurich, Wellington, Melbourne, like relatively small cities. Once you enter a certain threshold, like would be 3-5 million, you're never ever gonna get into these top 10, top 20, top 30. So New York is out, London is out, you know, like, sorry. And like, of course we can say, you know, I had a discussion with Rainier de Graaf about this, and he said, actually my values are absolutely opposite. So, you know, once I look on the best cities, I think the best one for me is Baghdad, which is 215 or whatever, and then Vienna would be the worst.
Well, let's talk about these characteristics and these boundaries. How many people in the audience use GIS very frequently? No? No? Wow, well, one person, two people raise their hands. Well, you know, geographic information systems, it's ways of tabulating data and have it geospatially referenced. You can use it for anything, to just show characteristic. The reason I'm bringing it up is because when you combine a boundary and a set of information based on a value that you choose, then you start defining a piece of a city. And there are many cities that overlay. I mean, New York has a political boundary, but it also has a cultural boundary, and a transportation boundary, a transit boundary, even a cooking boundary. We had an intern one year where we decided to give her a task. She was very smart, very facile with the computer, and we said, make us a map of the restaurants in Brooklyn. So by every census tract, which is a small division through which the data comes, find out what is the dominant ethnicity of the majority of restaurants there, and then map it through GIS onto Brooklyn. And it came out with this incredible looking thing that, you know, that could look like a new continent with, you know, a little bit of Greece here and China there, etc. Then we asked her to map the restaurants in Manhattan, and instead of showing them by their ethnicity, where there were more restaurants, make them taller. And then we decided to put that in the computer and to SketchUp and look at it in 3 dimensions, and we took the point of view of the Statue of Liberty, and lo and behold, looking at that data, 3-dimensionalized, it looked like the skyline of Manhattan. I mean, it sort of was one of these "you are what you eat" moments. But I just bring that up because the geographic information systems let you pick any variable you want: longevity, lifespan, fertility, income distribution, income inequality, ethnicity of population, number of tweets. It doesn't matter. You can sample the information that matters to you, and combining it with a boundary, you have now defined what your city is. And as long as you can understand that a multiplicity of cities can exist in the same space and time as one, then I think that expands our definition of city. It expands our definition of who operates on a city. Because each of these values, you know, chefs operate on the city of restaurants, not urban designers. You know, people, so it opens the dimensions of people who can work and improve and change a city. And I think it's an exciting new area that is becoming more and more into the consciousness, at least of the young designers that I encounter, and is broadening the ability of people to change their city, which ultimately I think is what leads to the most livable city.
Could I change the direction a little bit? Since Adam was so kind to give us the questions and throw everything over on us, I'd like to give him a question. What city do you like and why?
Oh.
Astonished, no?
Yeah, I lived in several cities, and I kind of I divide cities into different types, which is very simple because there's of course more of them, but really two of them. One is good for visit, one is good for living, and usually they don't match. And I actually enjoyed living in Rotterdam and in London, even though they didn't look really nice once you visit them. And I even also enjoy living in Los Angeles, which definitely didn't look fancy.
But those are all cities with a huge youth culture.
Yeah.
They're very active, very dynamic.
Yeah.
They're not beautiful, but...
No, but that's what I meant. One of the descriptions, what I thought was very interesting, is that notion of freedom, and notion of tolerance, and notion of possibilities. And to me, actually, I think, like, we in Prague, we have super tiring discussion about a vision of Prague. And we always end up with there's no vision.
What is it?
Everybody is skeptical and whatever.
Doesn't exist.
No, well, I offer one. Yeah, I think the cities which are successful are able in dealing with differences. So they are able to produce spaces and public spaces which could be used with different types of group and different type of people, and they enjoy it together. And I've been in Paris when there was a competition between Paris and London who's gonna get the Olympics. And it was won by London by 2 corrupted votes, I guess, but that was it. And in that day, I've met in Paris, I've met million people crying on the streets, you know, we lost and things like that. But in the evening, the discussion on television started, and it started about why we lost. And suddenly people said, because we are not good in managing differences. And in London they are, actually. So, you know, like, we've got incredible amount of immigrants, we move them out our outskirts.
Architectural differences, Paris is good in managing.
I don't think it's good in managing, like, cultural differences. And, like, if you compare London and Paris, I think London is clear winner in that, actually. But, okay. But I think I've talked too much, so...
that was perfect. What's the, you said Rotterdam and London.
Let's pick on one thing from the movie, which I think was very, very prominent, and it was about sprawl. And to me, actually, the sprawl is a very interesting topic, because similarly to what Craig said, I think once you said sprawl, you hear sprawl is bad, density is good. You know, let's move on. So let's start with this simple question, like, how you feel about when you hear urban sprawl? And I'll start with Matúš, probably because he didn't speak for a while.
I like to listen to this guy, so I'm just like, I start to take notes in a few minutes. I mean, I like the part of the movie when there was this fat developer guy who just admitted he loves to live in his 3,000 square meters or whatever, I'm sure he has a pool there. And
perfect American.
And that was just the truth, that maybe we architects don't like the sprawl, but people just love to have own piece of land with the pool. And that's the main, actually that was for me the best moment of the movie, because that was really very clearly said what's the difference. I mean, there's a lot of people who likes to have their small garden and the pool, and they don't care if they draw a car for 40 minutes. Of course, we know that it's bad because of environment, it's bad because of economy. There are many negative parts of it, but I like that part of the movie. And what's the question? What I think about the sprawl? Of course, I think it's not good, but I love to have a house with the pool. No, I mean, I mean, Bratislava is very good. It's very nice. It's a like kind of small laboratory. Everything is happening 10 years after other cities, or 50 years after, and everything is so small and very easy to understand and actually to see it. And we have what's happening in Bratislava is also happening in Prague. I'm sure it's this kind of sprawl which is never going to be so problematic as I believe was urbanization after Second World War in the United States. But what's happening now in these centers, that in these new areas, in this sprawl, that the people are able to live there. I mean, there are a few smart developers who just built a good social infrastructure there, and people just are happy there. So. And we can talk about density, we can talk about all these very, very sexy arguments we used to talk about, but I have this problem that people are happy there. I mean, okay.
Could I react? What I don't like is that the term sprawl is used only for suburban American expansions, and my point is more, when did sprawl really start? If you look back to the end of the 19th century, and you know, if at least people in Prague know how Prague didn't have today's morphology. So wasn't this expansion of the city of Prague at that time considered sprawl by people? But it was a different kind of sprawl, obviously, but you know, it didn't turn out badly, because the tapestry of Prague we all love and understand, and a lot of other cities in Europe have this same expansion, or let's sprawl, from the turn of the century, which turned out pretty nice. So it's the whole identity of Prague, for me, was based on the sprawl at the turn of the century. So the sprawl doesn't have to be bad. It doesn't have to be suburban American houses going out into nowhere. So I'm a little bit provoking this dialogue of where sprawl started and why sprawl has to be this let's say, connotation of horrible American suburbs.
I think sprawl exists in Czech Republic in a similar way that it exists in Norway and some other countries here in Europe, and it's a different kind of sprawl, and that's the sprawl of the second home, or the cottage. So you leave on the weekend to go to the cottage in the country, and so you may live in a fairly tight urban environment, but there's always that cottage, and they're like sprawled across the landscape. And it's strange because...
So we got it from Norway, or Norway got it from us?
No, I think it's just coincidence. I'm sure you'll find the same thing in other countries, I think. Yes, Norway have, yes, the cottage culture is very big. And the only thing that's interesting to me about it is that while I may not myself want to live in a faraway place like they showed in Phoenix with driving, but some people do like it. I think the problem with sprawl isn't the physical format of it, is what was raised by the lady just following the man who said he likes his swimming pool. And she said, well, that's great, but there's a lot of environmental resources that are being stressed by the sprawl. And so we're really, you know, just basically killing ourselves with it. If you want to live there, great, but then take responsibility for the environmental resources that are wasting. And a cottage in the country does exactly that. It means that every person has two homes, where in parts of the world, people don't even have one home. And all the energy to get you to the cottage in the countryside is a kind of sprawl. And then all the infrastructure to support the food and everything in the cottage. So it's kind of a strange, interesting, like, tangent.
Alex?
Well, sure where best to fit into this. Oh, I can actually. New York? Well, no, in New York we do have very suburban areas even within the city limits, and that's a reflection that people do like to live in a single family home with a driveway. And in our growth, you know, we need to grow by 1 million more New Yorkers, as Amanda said, in the next generation. And our pattern for growth is to rezone to higher density around our transit nodes. New York has believed in transit-oriented development already for a century now. We believe it for the next century. But in tandem with upzoning around transit, we're downzoning in the areas without transit, so that there will be areas of just single-family homes that will have a suburban feel to them. The American sociologist Christopher Lineberger, who studied, he's very much a downtown advocate, but he studied this problem for quite a long time. I remember a conclusion from one of his books where he said, look, from all the statistical research he could do, it seemed like about 30% of the people absolutely have to live in suburbs for their psyches. About a third of the people really, really want to live downtown in a walkable, livable community. And he said, another third just don't care. So it's that middle third, sort of the hearts and minds that that the sort of cities and suburbs compete over. I think though for a city it is good to have diversity even in its housing stock, so that tolerance of difference. I mean, New York would be a lesser place if everything were Manhattan. You know, it's wonderful to have the skyscraper forest on Manhattan, but also to have brownstone Brooklyn, and also to have this trailer park in Staten Island. New York actually has a rather lovely little trailer park, you know, of manufactured homes sitting in neat little rows in Staten Island. They all come together as part of the diversity. I would say though, and this is not so much a New York issue as more of a federal policy issue, there are many, many hidden subsidies in American economics and taxation that make it relatively easier to build a suburb than to retrofit a downtown. Something as simple, if you build, let's say you renovate a factory in a downtown in one city that I've worked in, every new unit has to pay the same sewer hookup fee as a suburban McMansion does 20 miles out. But the sewer already exists downtown. All you're doing is drilling a hole. Whereas to put in the sewer for the development in the suburbs, you're laying 20 miles of pipe. Why should the downtown redeveloper be paying just as much and not getting a discount? Or why shouldn't the suburban developer be paying a premium for all those goods and services that will now be used to subsidize that greenfield development?
My joke after the lecture today was that America is what happens when you give Europeans too much space. And there's some truth to that. You know, I mean, it was a place that had very few inhabitants, and really within a fairly short period of time suddenly had many, with centuries of history brought along with them, colliding with an indigenous population. So, you know, these kinds of odd things like they show in Phoenix are sort of make sense when you look at it from that perspective. It was an irrational kind of beginning.
I do a small provocation, and I did a calculation a couple of years ago that the average population density of the planet is extremely low. And it's actually 0.4 per hectare, which is incredibly low. And I know, like, somebody would say, you know, of course you've got deserts, you know, and you've got, I don't know, tundras and whatever, but even if you count them out, then it's still incredibly low. Yeah. And it's so surprising to me. And when I take a look on that, and from that I did a small observation that maybe the problem of sprawling is that the density is too high, you know. And that's, I'm maybe a bit getting to what Craig was mentioning, because I think the density is a funny word, no? Because like if you mention density between architects, everybody say great, you know, high density, great, cool, you know. And if you say to people, let's densify the center, then like, wow, no, never, you know. Like, are you crazy? You know, like, why would we densify? But there's one point I would like to mention together with density, and it was Rick Scofidio mentioning about the connections of civilization, civitas, and nature. And he didn't say landscape; he said nature. No, like, and he meant it, I think, as he mentioned, like really, like, so these things which are normally understood as competitors or adversaries, you know, can they somehow work together, and how?
I would just like to ask if we have any other American example of a successful city besides New York.
San Francisco. Yeah.
Please use microphones.
I mean, much as they're our rivals, so I don't want to plug them, but Chicago is a pretty great city, and San Francisco is good as well. Los Angeles is actually a pretty fascinating city, and
Canada and other places, Vancouver.
Toronto, Vancouver, San Antonio, smaller cities in America like Raleigh or Chapel Hill, that sort of research triangle, in Boston, of course, is a pretty great place. Portland, Maine, Charleston, South Carolina, Portland, Oregon as well. No, we have a few. We have some pretty good. We have some pretty decent cities. America's a big place.
Can I have a small example how public perceives something different from architect, because now we are talking about some good cities, but a few years ago in Bratislava, I'm still putting out pocket of Bratislava. I know I need to promote a little bit because like nobody really knows where it is. There was this petition. People were signing for a petition against Manhattanization of Bratislava. And I said, no, I want Manhattanization.
We have those same petitions here.
And that's also the very good point out. It's pointing out how different is for us. Manhattan is such a laboratory and everything. All this history and everybody, all architects love it. I love it personally very much. And but people have some completely different vision or what is the good city for them, So that's the gap we need to cross sometimes, I think, because
once we start to talk about public opinions, that's always for me a signal, that we should not do that actually, and we should ask, So please. So now it's actually, I think there are some ladies with microphone. Yeah, somebody up there with a white shirt.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Erik Vrijters from the Netherlands. So, okay. I have a question. In the latter part of the movie, Mr. Peters from South Africa suggested that there will be built new cities like 30 or 40 in Asia and Africa. To me that's kind of interesting, because he also said that there would be nothing like the cities we know now. Are you agreeing with him? And how would cities be extremely different than they are now?
And who would you like to ask that question?
All of you, you're designers, you can build a better table.
Then who wants to answer it?
Well, I just want to say I really like the question, because it was sort of trying to get it's what I'm trying to get my head around too, just somehow trying to imagine what's not there yet. And in order to imagine that, you have to understand the trajectory of human relations over vast periods of time. And certainly if a new city of the scale of the cities that we imagine as super cities today, and the millions of people will grow in the future in a place that doesn't yet have a city or even a town, how might that grow? My guess is that it will make many of the same fundamental mistakes. It will challenge people psychologically. However, one believes that by that time, their reliance on natural resources and economic and political structures that we have today will be very different. So I would imagine a city in the future like that, hopefully, will have a very different regulatory system, a very different political system that allows people to interact in a kind of more enlightened way with how things grow. So I don't want to give a lot of credit, for example, to the Occupy Wall Street or Occupy Praha people, who I really admire that work, but they set up some really interesting approaches how to develop their little piece of occupied land. And I mentioned Christiania in Copenhagen. Those are places that redefine the regulatory systems. And Mayor Bloomberg's administration has tried to do that inside of the existing confines of government there. But I think that that will allow for people to create their own places more organically through time, so that perhaps things will be less controlling, I think.
If I could give my opinion, I think it's a really provocative proposition. I think that basic human nature, the basic primal needs have not changed over thousands of years. So if this is going to be a place which is like nothing we've ever seen, why would we like it? You know, if it can be, it's a visionary place, fantastic architecture, okay. But people have basic needs of community, of health, of education, of entertainment. So what's going to be there that's not like anything we've ever seen? And if it is that, if that's true, then why would anybody want to be there?
I hope that answers Eric's question. So there's another one on the right.
Okay, let me have two questions. One, what we face here, at least in Prague, is that we have a very historical place with, you know, old Baroque architecture, and we have to somehow combine preservation of cultural heritage with new development, which we are not very successful at. And I think, for instance, we have a club for old Prague here, but we lack a club for new Prague. And at the end of the day, when there is any attempt to build something provocative, modern, new, it usually fails and it goes nowhere. So my first question is, if you know of any kind of similar city, old, historical, with a lot of heritage, that successfully merged these two approaches. That's one. And second, just in the movie there was one architect who mentioned that architecture competitions is a very weird thing, because usually 90% of good ideas is wasted. Well, from what I see here is that we even fight to enter this tradition of architecture competitions. And so I wonder, what is your observation on this, on architecture competitions, for design competitions, for planning? And the very last thing, you know, I was in Guinea as well.
Too many questions.
And Conakry is not as bad.
Actually, I would like Craig to answer about the competitions, because he already mentioned it today, and I think the answer was fantastic. So, Craig, please.
Yeah, but you said you'd been to Conakry, and what was your comment? I didn't hear that.
It was not that bad.
That Conakry is not as bad and unsafe, and Guinean village is not as ideal.
Yeah, well, okay, we have a difference of opinion. I loved it. I mean, I would have stayed there a long time. It's not like I hated it. It was just unsanitary, and there was disease. So, anyway, the competition question. I've been asked this already at the talk today. You know, there is a challenge that people get abused, and as it is mentioned by Rem Koolhaas in the movie, that architects are probably the only profession that has this kind of an abuse. I mean, it's like walking into a doctor's office and getting 3 doctors to give you medical advice, and then not paying 2 of them, and then choosing the 3rd, and then telling them how that you want them to operate on you. You know, it's a weird system. On the other hand, it does allow for debate, and it does allow for diversity. So I believe that competitions have value. Now, the word competition in my mind is very much like the word democracy or concept or all these other words we use. They represent like 500,000 variations, you know. It's not one kind of competition. We're in competition always. So even if you eliminated the whole competition process, then you'd be competing against other architects for the job. So you're always in competition. To pretend that there isn't any, or there's some perfect system that removes competition, would be wrong. So I prefer the idea that you have a range, or a diverse range of competitions. Some of them are well paid for those architects who can't afford to do free work. They have too much of an economy at stake. They have too many people that are hired in their office. They can't just do free work. And those competitions should be for certain kinds of projects that are equitable or useful for those types of conglomerate offices. Then there can be competitions that are free, or that have less payback, and that allows younger people, younger architects to be involved. They should have less rules and regulations. And since the older, more experienced architects or the more famous ones aren't doing the free ones because they can't afford it, that gives a chance for the younger architects to succeed. So the competition system, if managed properly, would be great. The problem is, it's just not managed. So no one's out there saying, ooh, let's have 5 kinds of unpaid and 2 kinds of paid, and 1 kind of famous architect competition and 1 kind of local architect competition. And that's the architect's fault once again, I think.
I would like to answer the question about the competitions, because I did my Fulbright research, and one of the questions I was dealing with was the architectural competitions. And I came to conclusion, of course, firstly I was seeing it as an exploitation, and I mean, we are the only profession who is doing this, but in the end, with the help of other very smart people, I came to conclusion that architecture is influencing so many lives, so many people who never want to have nothing with architecture. They're influenced by us, by houses, by whatever architects are doing, that it's some kind of ethical and moral obligation to really, maybe of our profession, to sometimes work for free a lot of time and try to really find the best solution. I mean, that's the main thing. And that's also the beginning of why architects are doing competition, because they are trying to find the best solution.
If I could say, my opinion is that in a lot of other European countries, great architects' careers are started from competitions, and it's really a way of breaking into the industry. And I think the comment is that in this country, this is not happening. People are winning competitions and nothing's being built. So it's incredibly disappointing. And I can say personally that our studio has been involved in competitions, but we just don't do them anymore because they go nowhere. Even world architects can win competitions here and things are not built. So I think the complaint is more, let's say, a cry for help of how can we try to solve this problem here, because careers are not made here from competitions usually. Occasionally, maybe, but it's not like the rest of Europe.
Do you have a union, architects union?
A what?
I knew I would ask a question that would get that. I mean, you don't have an architects union, or you do, but they're not very effective. Or yeah, I mean that's one of the things. It's hard to get architects to unionize. I mean, a lot of the competitions, you get 5
because we want to work here.
Yeah, but if you pulled yourselves together and made yourself a union that had enough strength to monitor, to oversee, and to implement changes in the competition system, that of course takes a bunch of architects agreeing with each other, which you either need a lot of beer or alcohol or drugs or something to get them to agree, but it is possible. You can implement the system. In Norway we have 2 unions. We have an architects union and we have an architects employees union for the people that work for other architects.
Wow.
It's great. And in our office we have yet a 3rd union, because we organize our office internally. We have a self-defined union in the office, so we have basically 3.
Alex. On the subject of competitions, though, I think you guys should pull back a second and think strategically. Look at it from the point of view of the people making the competition. One problem that I have seen from the point of view of government, I have seen how certain organizations will call for a competition because they don't know what the question is, and they'll ask for an answer. And they think that somehow the competition process absolves them of the need to formulate the question clearly. And one of the reasons so much competition work is wasted is that the problem posed is the wrong one. So anyway, I think if I were going to suggest the type of competition to have, it would be to design the problem, not the solution. And architects would be fantastic.
It's true. And so that was the second question to answer to the second question of David, and the first one was about managing cultural heritage with the new stuff. So he's gonna try to.
Well, we're working in San Francisco right now, which is a city that's remarkably similar to Prague. It's hilly. It's small in terms of about 1 million people, so the population is about the same. It doesn't have Baroque architecture, but it has an enormously powerful cultural core that they are incredibly protective of in San Francisco. It has a lot of challenges to build inside it, and they've been very conservative for a number of years. But in recent years, they've recognized that the pressures are requiring some degree of change. And they've done it slowly, but they have some good buildings there, and we're building something which is not at all historical in a sense. But I would then answer the question by saying what I've been saying before in this panel, is that you have to take it on yourself. You have to find a way to talk to people, to get them to understand that your work, even if it is contemporary, has value to a historical tradition. You know, we approach discussions as architects with a language that no one understands. We expect our work to be covered by our ego, and we expect everyone to sort of appreciate the great things that we do without any kind of clarity of discussion. So in San Francisco, we have for the first time a contemporary building of large-scale cultural building was unanimously approved in every city authority in San Francisco. It's the first time it's ever happened with unanimous approval. And it's because we spent a lot of time out there talking to people, walking around, trying to figure out an organic process, and we developed this thing that people feel they owned. And that, I think, is a big part of it. So, again, I would say don't sort of push it off to everyone else. Yeah, okay, there are lots of, you know, people out there that are pig-headed, but, you know, so what?
I would like to say, to give a credit to people like Robert Mose or Baron Haussmann, because I spent my high school years, 4 years, I lived at Rome, which is very difficult to live. It's the city where I really don't like to live there. I mean, I spent a few years there, but it wasn't very difficult for moving around and so on. And that's the good example that in Paris somebody take the strong position and do the very strong moves, and that's the same with Robert Moses. I mean, so that's the Rome is the perfect story how the preservation, even if it's very important, make the city unlivable in the 21st century.
Well, if I could a little bit talk to that question, you know, if you live here, as I do for 18 years, and you go to Spain, or you go to France, or you go to Austria, all places which have fantastic history, they embrace modern architecture in incredible ways, and this is not happening here. It's kind of like modernism is bad, and I think the question or the cry for help again is more about how can we get past this, how can we get this context to accept modern architecture without you know, the fights and the blocking for years of interesting architecture. Because interesting architecture here, modern architecture, is very limited. I'm not talking about modern architecture 50 years old, I'm talking about modern architecture from now.
Could you suggest that there was such a backlash against what happened during the communist era, the sort of heroic internationalism that was imposed on the city in a certain way, has had a kind of latent challenge, psychological challenge to get past, you know, and that's happened in a lot of places, and in a certain sense it may take time. So maybe the idea is to go the other direction and do smaller things. I was saying, I went to that park where the metronome is. You know, that park really needs help. And instead of putting a sports stadium there, like I think they were planning to do, you know, just fix the park up and do some really nice contemporary. You can do contemporary things.
Ask the audience what was there before the metronome.
That was a Stalin thing or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah. So you know, the metronome's pretty neat. But I was up there, you know, and there were lots of kids up there. It was late at night. I was there really late, so it was pitch dark. You know, I saw a few people walking their little dogs, and then a bunch of kids hanging out on the edge, looking at the city and joking and laughing. And there was no place for them to sit. There were, you know, no decent amenities. There's no place to go to the toilet. you know, all of that stuff, which is what I think is happening at a certain level in New York, starting to appreciate the value of these kinds of spaces, and you're putting in contemporary architecture there, getting people used to it at a small scale, so that over time they may be more used to it in a large scale.
I forgot to say Michael Jackson was there once also.
I just want to mention one thing, and I absolutely admired Craig's sensitivity for the place. He came on Wednesday, I guess, or something, and he spent some time in here. And I just talked to him for a while, and I was amazed by the how he like get around and what he now knows about the Prague. And I think he knows in certain areas he knows way more than we who live here. And like seriously. And actually, like what came to my mind as a suggestion, I think like our city government should hire people like him for a week walk around Prague and just to, you know, like get his opinions about stuff, because I was amazed, you know, and his lecture today showed, and it was filmed, so watch it, you know, so it's just like a huge compliment, Craig. Any questions? Go.
Ne, tady měl být někdo z magistrátu dneska večer.
I agree. No, I mean, you know what? This thing was organized a lot by really young people. I think it seems like everyone I met, the organizing group, was really young, and I was like, yeah. You know, but you know, next time go out and just literally go to their office and just drag them out somehow, physically.
Defenestration, you mean?
Correct. There was another question in here, down there. No, I think in here, like fourth row or in the middle. Sixth, actually. Does it work?
Yeah. I have a question for Craig. I was living in Norway for 6 months or something as an exchange student, and I was living in Drammen. And I visited the city last year and noticed that they celebrated 500 years or something, and that your office is participating in project for their development of next 25 years or something, if that's correct. And if there's something, if I'm right, so if there is something inspiring about the development of that city or not.
For those of you that don't know Norway, Drammen is kind of a suburb of Oslo. It's not very well appreciated by many people. It's sort of like a remote part of the metropolis. It has a kind of train stop and a bus stop. So there's a joke in Norwegian, drømmen om Drammen, which means dreaming about Drammen. The good question maybe is more appropriately what can be done in these fringe areas to make them appealing. And a lot of it has to do with infrastructure. So how do you deal with cars? It's basically everything that Jeanette Sadiq-Khan and what Alex was talking about and others. You know, how do you control the impact of infrastructure on these places, because generally speaking most of the emphasis is put on the cores of cities. So
yeah, I've never been to Drammen, but I have been to Tyson's Corner, an edge city of Washington DC, and worked on a plan there. And this sort of larger phenomenon of taking these sort of sprawl nodes, we call them edge cities in the US, where there are typically regional shopping centers and some kind of concentration of office building. And then there's a movement as the land gets more and more valuable to redevelop these, and there was an effort going on in Tyson's Corner where they were bringing the metro in, a couple of metro stops, and then connecting that to Dulles Airport. It's generally the densification of an edge city into what by any statistical measure would be a city. But the exciting prospect in the short piece of work that we were able to do then was not just so much the bulk and planning organization of tall buildings, but the ability, because this land was semi-sprawl, and a lot of the natural features had not yet been infrastructuralized. I mean, there would be ravines and creeks that would be meandering. There'd be patches of forest in the cloverleaf interchanges of the highways. These places were not yet developed enough in building that you couldn't actually bring the natural infrastructure to the forefront. So I think that's actually a pretty promising way of developing and densifying some of our edge cities, is to kind of give first order prominence to natural infrastructures and let them coexist with the man-made or transportation infrastructure that you overlay on them, and kind of make a tartan grid of multiple forms of both water management, transportation, communication, vistas, etc. Could end up being actually a very, very rich urban experience, and may give us something of a hint of what these new cities, these sort of cities of tomorrow, might be. Because chances are the city of tomorrow is going to be where the city of today is.
I hope that answered the question. So let's say the last one, or two last ones. There's one. Okay, so one over there.
Okay, I'm a student of architecture, and I would like to ask your opinion about the future for students, about the educational system today. We know that the world has changed a lot. The economical crisis.
Bad last question.
Yeah, it's like is it in migration? Like Czech Republic has one of the highest rates of educated architects per 1,000 persons. Then the situation in Greece leads to that the population of Greeks in Germany doubled in 1 year, and in Spanish too. And are we prepared for this situation? And of course, we're in a different situation than you were 20, 30 years ago when you started. So what is your point of view?
Actually, I replied to that question very quickly. So just first of all, it's not true. You know, like the amount of architects per person, it's below average in European Union. I mean, even students. But there's just one comment on it, and somebody told me, and I believe in that. Like being educated as architect is always good, no matter what you're gonna do. So no worries.
The education of architects is definitely flawed. It's built around a rather unusual system of disconnection from the actual art or science of making things. So there tends to be a lot of thinking, not a lot of making. Thinking is good; it's very important, but making is also very important. I think the studio system is challenged. Young architects are given very little practical understanding of the decisions that they make. The review system is challenged because you're essentially there to hear the critics, and there's no empowerment of students. And so I think the architectural education system will change. But I do agree with you. Architects are great generalists, so we can often do a lot of things. All of my friends that were in architecture school that didn't become architects are much more successful and much more happy, I think, than I am. So, you know, something's good out there for them. So yeah, you know, there's a lot to do other than architecture. And I also say, when architects are graduating, and when I've done a few sort of graduation things for commencement speeches, graduation speeches, and they all say, well, you know, how am I going to get a job? And I said, when I left school, this was the last question on my mind. I was not thinking about how to get a job. It just didn't even matter to me. I was just interested in how I could do what I wanted to do, and I found a way to do it. And there were many alternatives other than getting a job at an architect's office.
Wow. Well, you're probably not going to get a job in an architect's office. There are very few jobs around right now, and things are probably getting worse before they get better. I mean, so on a bummer note, yeah, but that's probably the reality. Well, no, I'm gonna send them home maybe with a plea to think a little bit about what they just saw in the movie. I mean, yes, architecture job numbers are dwindling, but city population numbers are increasing. All I'm saying is that I think that the training you get as an architect now is better served or better used if you can apply it to trying to figure out the needs of cities and then trying to meet them. And that the great, great, great growth story of this century is the growth of cities. And to the degree the best way to serve that is to hope for a job as an apprentice in an architecture firm and wait around for a commission, you can take that route, but there are not going to be many openings available. But if you can use your imagination, use your entrepreneurial, use your thinking skills, visualizing skills, convincing skills, one of the good things about the jury system is that you learn how to handle criticism. And you can take that and go out in the world. The key is to identify the problem, state the problem correctly, and then see where you can fit to help it. Just to summarize, I mean, it's very bleak on the specific traditional architecture front, but it is actually wide open on the sort of person who wants to not just design cities, but understand them and help them to overcome whatever problems are in their way. And that could be political, it could be financial, it could be design. Chances are it's going to be a combination of all three.
I think that was perfect ending, actually. There's one more question? No. Okay, to all of you who became fans of Enrique Peñalosa, who was the mayor of Bogota from 1998 to 2001, I've got just two remarks, actually. One of them is that there is an incredible movie which is called Cities on Change, Bogota. You can find it on YouTube. You can watch it for free. It's 1 hour, and it explains the evolution of the Bogota in last 15 years, and not only about Enrique Peñalosa, but mainly about the previous mayor Antanas Mokus, which I think both of them are incredible persons, and one wouldn't exist without the another one. So that's very similar to what Alex mentioned. We need both J. Jacobs, we need both Robert Moses. Enrique Peñalosa is actually Robert Moses in this story, and Antanas Mokus is actually Jane Jacobs, if I would mention it. And the another one is, I think to answer the question about like why are not people from magistrate in here, I think we need actually people like Enrique Peñalosa come to Prague, and we've got the audience of 300. I think whoever can help with this, like that would be great. So. Because like we are bringing designers, it would be also great if we will start bringing successful politicians and politicians. Yeah, we did. We did, and just to maybe to say that, because I think it's interesting. At least the deputy mayor Tomáš Jureček is gonna come to New York this summer. And Janet promised to show him around. So that's also, I hope, big deal, because like maybe in there he can appreciate it maybe even better than in here. So that was amazing from her. She agreed. She gave him her business card, and so that's gonna happen in June or July, I guess. Thank you very much, and thank you for the panelists. I mean, they've been amazing. Thank you.